To install the Gaming Shop bullet buttons on an Xbox One controller, you'll need the following tools: a screwdriver with a T6 and a T8 Torx bit, a small pliers and a tweezers, and what's not shown, a soldering iron. The first step is to flip the controller over and pry off the handle covers. They snap right off. This will expose screws that hold the controller together. There's also one underneath the battery cover, so you'll need to remove that. Just use the Torx T8 bit to remove all these screws. There's 5 of them in total. The top cover should now just lift off. Set that aside. Now use the tweezer handle to pry the metal bracket, and this should separate the top from the back cover. Now we need to remove the wiring for the motors and the connections on the board. There's 4 wires on each side. Just desolder these wires, but it's best to take a picture of it before you do this so you remember the order of the wires. Once it's desoldered, you can remove the motor. So then we move to the other side and do the other 4 wires. Once you've got this one finished, you can remove the second motor. The next step is to change from the T8 to the T6 Torx bit. You'll need this to remove the 2 screws that hold the circuit board in place. Make sure you don't lose the screws. You'll need these later to reassemble. This circuit board will now pop off, but it's being held by the knobs on the other side, so as you pull the board out, the 2 knobs will fall into your hand. There's also a plastic cover that goes around the Xbox symbol. Just pry underneath that and that'll snap off. There's a little black button piece that also comes off with it. Use the same smaller Torx bit to remove the remaining screws on the second circuit board. There's quite a few screws on this one. Once you get all those screws released, the board should lift right out. On the back of the board is the rubber membrane switch. That simply lifts off, and then there's 2 little white rubber pieces that go into the switch. We're now ready to install the bullet buttons, so open the packaging and take out the bullet buttons. Remove the original buttons from the controller. These should pop right into your hand. Set those aside and then get the bullet buttons and line them up with the pins. They should fall right into place if they're in the proper hole. Now install the rubber membrane with the black dots facing upwards, right on top of the bullet buttons. Then install the circuit board on top of the membrane so it lines up as it did before. Now take the screws that you removed and reinstall every one of them to permanently put the board in place. Install the little white rubber pieces into the slots next to the switches. Once those are in place, then install the black piece on top of its little switch. From there you can install the cover that goes over the Xbox symbol and just snap it in place. There's a connector that lays on top of the circuit board. Put it in its proper spot and then install the circuit board on top of it. This should snap just about in place, and then you finish it by putting in the final 2 screws. Now we can install the motors. This is where if you had a picture of how the wires were connected, you could just copy from the picture. There are markings on the board, but it's best to have a picture to reference. It makes the job much easier. Solder each wire to its proper location on both sides, installing both motors. After that's done, we're ready to finish the controller. Install the back cover. It should set right in place. Test the buttons, make sure everything's working. Now put on the knobs that popped off when you pulled out that circuit board and put the top cover on. You should now be able to reinstall the screws, but remember you have to switch back to the T8 Torx bit. Reinstall all the screws and then you can snap on the handle covers. The final step is to install the battery cover. Snap that in place and then flip the control over and test the buttons, make sure nothing's sticking. Congratulations! Your Xbox One controller now has the Gaming Shop bullet buttons.